For those of you that have completed Module 1 and Module 2 of the Who Am I series, we offer a retreat in the Lake District for a few days. The Lake District is where I grew up and is definitely my spiritual home. It's a place of great beauty, very sweet air, and there is this magic to it. You feel like you're entering a magic circle, and it's a place of great healing. So on the retreat, we will do a little bit of meditation, yoga, of course, breath work. We will go much deeper into the question of who am I? And what will also be very nice is for you to meet the people that you've been working with so closely. This will be a place of healing, a place of rejuvenation, and as always with the Who Am I series, a place of deep inquiry to discover more about who you really are. So we very much hope you will join us on this. I think it will be a beautiful weekend and will take you deeper.
Hello everybody and welcome, and this is the Midnight McBride Show, and this week my special guest is Gregory Garrett. Now Gregory is the co-founder of St Catherine's Retreat in Windermere and also co-founder of The Quantum Questions. Welcome onto the show, Gregory.
Thank you, Pat. Thanks for
very
inviting
welcome.
me.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Although I spent quite a large portion of my life in the last few years writing about meditation and going on meditation retreats and Buddhist centres and even transcendental meditation, I feel I'm in the presence of a far greater expert than myself. So I'm very excited about doing this show.
Thanks, Pat. And just to remember, we're all mirrors. So,
Exactly.
to be able to observe it means it's percolating inside. And, thanks for being so kind and welcoming me.
No. I've heard a couple of people refer to you as a guru, which I think is an incredible compliment, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say I know some really high teachers and gurus. I definitely wouldn't put myself on a par with them. And that's not just me practicing humility. That is me really paying witness to the magnificence that I've been able to witness within human beings who are actually present on the planet with us right now.
Yeah, I say there's very few enlightened beings on the planet at the minute, but there are a few, a couple. And I'd say Sadhguru is one of those. I think he's an enlightened being as well. I usually tell people how we met or how we were introduced, and it's through a former guest on the show, Mr. Liam Brown.
Yeah, I mean, Liam, what a great guy. People, I have him on my phone as Choco God because he's now so well known for his cacao ceremonies. Yeah.
Great energy. He came in the studio and we basically laughed from start to finish. We ended up doing 2 shows back to back, and it was an absolute pleasure. Really good. Yeah.
He's a beautiful spirit.
Yeah. I also mentioned there's a few people. It seems to be that there's a cacophony of spiritual people based in the lakes, and obviously with Ulverston having Manjushri as well. But Catherine Beaumont and Debbie Henderson and Ben Atkinson, all guests on this show, and all very spiritual people, beautiful people. And I didn't know whether you'd cross paths with any of those.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, some of the names sound familiar. Yeah. It's quite interesting that, you can have proximity to people, even in a particular area like, personal, professional, spiritual development, and, still not have the pleasure yet.
meeting them. Yeah.
Yeah, but, the right time, right place,
Yeah.
everything.
I have a feeling you'll all cross paths, I'm sure.
I think you're right.
So I thought we'd start off, although we're going to go down your life journey, we'll talk about how you arrived in this present moment, and then talk about all the amazing things that you're doing now with St. Catherine's Retreat and the Quantum Questions. I wanted to ask you one simple question to kick off the show, and that is, what are the Quantum Questions?
So Lucy Pattinson, one of the co-founders, came up with the name The Quantum Questions. And it came from a discussion with our teacher at Vaitananda. And it came about really because society in the world now needs to begin to journey inwards. Yeah. And, the saying, unless we go within, we go without.
Yeah.
And so myself, which will be probably part of this story today, and many other people have been lost in the material world. So the Quantum Questions is about turning the direction inwards and beginning to ask fundamental questions again.
Who am I? Why am I here? What's it all about?
Correct.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I mean, I know myself, I was lost in the matrix and in the pursuit of material wealth and power and status and all that kind of stuff for a long time, and I think a lot of people get lost,
Yeah, and people, the getting lost is about, people talk about layering up, putting layers in. And I was looking at a quote in your book earlier where, you're saying a square person doesn't fit in a round hole or something. We need to take the edges off.
Yeah.
So, very much the inner journey is about recognizing who we're not. And then, going on the journey towards letting go. Peeling off layers, armor, being able to look at the shadow part of ourselves, and then being able to see the beauty in that and embrace and, bring light back to those aspects of ourselves that have been dormant or asleep.
Yeah. I think the quote is, the present moment has a round window and anybody with sides can't get in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But, yeah, I liked it.
I was only testing you.
Yeah, well,
if you knew your own quotes.
I'll pass. Yeah. This journey, for anybody that's watching this, it won't be anything like you think it's going to be. It'll be quite a surprise. There's a few twists and turns on it, and I think there's a book somewhere here as well, Greg.
Quite possibly many books. Yeah.
So we'll start off, and you're a Liverpool lad.
I am. Yeah, I was born in Liverpool, 1969. 12th of December, so I'll be 51 this year, so I'm in my 50th year. And what an amazing year to be 50.
Yeah, that's a very positive way of looking at it.
I think it's always important to remain positive in the sense that energies are moving in one or two directions. They're either moving downwards or they're moving upwards, and unfortunately, as a community, as a society, as a planet, for most people, the energies are moving downwards, which means you can look at the human condition and spirit, and sadly, people have a negativity bias. Yeah. It's a reality. So what does that mean? It means they're negative in their thoughts, therefore in their points of view, in their opinions. And it's not that they're being bad. It's just that we've trained ourselves
exactly
to be this way.
We're programmed and conditioned, and for every positive thought, we'll have 50 negative ones. And it's being able to, like a conveyor belt, is to pick the positive ones and focus on those. That's a skill set. It's something you learn to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and therefore, it's something you unlearn, and then you can actually learn to be in the opposite frame, which is to be optimistic, to be upbeat, and even to find the higher, because we're talking about higher states of consciousness now.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people talk about them, a lot of people write about them, but there's really actually very few people who experience them. And hopefully we can get a little bit more into that as we go.
So we're in Liverpool, and you've got you're one of 5 children, is that right?
I am the middle child, middle child syndrome.
Right.
So
what is the middle child? I know what the youngest and the oldest. What's the middle one?
No, middle child syndrome is I'm not wanted, because the eldest
They don't
ones
get the attention from the extremes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The eldest have already established themselves, and then the youngest are the ones that everyone dotes on. So,
What
poor
about me?
in
You
the
forgot
middle.
about me.
Yeah.
And you went to St. Mary's School initially?
Yeah, I went to the prep school, St. Mary's College, Crosby. So some people might see me as one of those, privileged children, private school, Catholic school. And then, and I remember enjoying, St. Mary's.
Yeah. But when we discussed it, you got beaten.
Yeah, I did. I was beaten by the Christian brothers. They were very quick to pull the leather strap out.
Not very Christian, is it? That?
It's not Christian, and actually, within the last 10 years, I met one of the brothers who was there, who was famous for his violence.
Yeah.
And I took him to task over it. And it's quite interesting to see an older man regress into being a young boy when someone's now towering over him, asking him very pertinent questions.
Yeah, I can sympathise with that. Yeah, mm-hmm. It was, I think, commonplace. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, we had corporal punishment. Teachers clip people round the head, give kids. Certainly, if not a beating, they'd certainly hit them, on a regular basis. I've seen that. And I think it's terrible. It's terrible that we'd all became accustomed to that and that we couldn't see past it. But I always use this analogy, and you have people, if you go back, I don't know, 150 years ago, saying you're born into a world where slavery is still prominent. Do you, at that point, say, no, this is wrong, or do you not know any different? Quite often it's only with hindsight we look back and we can see the error of our ways, and sometimes there's a 50-year lag. Yeah. And we look back and we think, apartheid, burning witches, slavery, all these things now seem so ridiculous. But if you're born into that world and you don't know any different and you're conditioned that way, would you know any different? I'd like to think we would. But.
Well, I think the answer... it lies in if you imagine the level of consciousness that an individual has allows them to experience life in a certain way and interpret life in a certain way. Yet life itself also shows up at the level of consciousness that we're at. So what was a really transformational point for me was realizing that young Greg, back in the school when I was being beaten for not being able to read, reflected the level of consciousness that I had. Now, I don't necessarily, I'm into many lifetimes, so what was my karmic inheritance that led me to this place? Yet being able to take responsibility for my consciousness at that moment in time gave me the opportunity to see all of the actors and players in a different light, to be able to see the parents doing the best that they could with their level of consciousness that corresponded to mine, the teachers in the same way, inside of all their thuggery and stupidity, having an equally low level of consciousness. Yeah. Yet there we all were, acting out on the same vibrational level. Now, in taking responsibility for that, I can now make a shift. Yeah. But if I don't take responsibility, if I blame them, I've got no place from which I can move.
Yeah. Wayne Dyer always said, blame has no place in a healthy mind. Blaming anybody else for your current situations, you might not want to be there, but it's your choices that have usually led you to that place. There are exceptions to this. There are always exceptions. But I used to talk about the fact that if somebody had an accident, that quite often they weren't fully present, and that's the cause of nearly all accidents. And then we'd always get extreme examples. I'd give a talk and somebody said, yeah, but what if there was an earthquake or a hurricane? And, I had an answer for it, but quite often, people use extreme examples. There's always exceptions. But yeah, blame. I think once you start to take responsibility for your situation, your actions, certainly when you're an adult, then you feel empowered. You know, not only do you take charge, you can decide where you go next. You know, but that's a really important thing to learn, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, I think if you add the negativity bias we talked about earlier, it doesn't really go hand in hand with responsibility. You know, real responsibility is a positive, forthright place where ownership is taken. And then from that place of power, the individual, with their freedom of mind, you know, freedom to be creative, freedom to be optimistic, they're able to make a decision in real time. There is a decision that corresponds to that inner freedom. Sadly, again, at the moment, I believe the number is growing, but too few people have taken responsibility and are able to experience true inner freedom.
Very wise words, Greg. Yeah. So you're in Liverpool and you're doing your daily rosary. In your notes, it says pilgrimages all over Europe.
Yeah.
With your family, how does that work?
Yeah, so both with the family and then also later on with the school that I went to. But we would visit all the Marian shrines. So Marian are the ones devoted to the Virgin Mother.
Yeah.
And my mother was said the rosary daily up until her death last year. And she was also a daily mass goer. So we were in a heavily Catholicized environment.
Yeah. Where did you go on your pilgrimages to?
So, I mean, all of the shrines, been to Knock a few times, Medjugorje a few times, been to Lourdes many times. So quite literally, all the shrines of Europe.
I suppose there's some good aspects. You got to travel and see a lot, and I've not been to Lourdes. I'd love to go. So some good sides to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good. I mean, I look at the whole aspect of devotion. Even if people could become devoted to something that was really meaningful and beautiful to them, which might not necessarily be related to spirituality, yet a positive form of devotion. Maybe you've been a triathlete, so devoted to health and fitness. I think some form of positive devotion is a great starting point. Finding something of spiritual significance and becoming devoted to that can be much later on down the line. Yeah, but finding devotion, first of all, is something I'd encourage people to do.
That's interesting, because I never would have seen it like that with, say, sport. But I suppose it is. It might not be spiritual, but you've chosen something and that's what you focus all your energy on and give your time to. It's still devotion, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. And discipline as well is another thing.
What I found was quite an unusual twist in your journey. Although your mother's doing a daily rosary, she's an alcoholic as well.
She was, yeah.
Sorry, she was an alcoholic.
She was. I mean, she's no longer with us, so she's literally in spirit now, although she was in a different type of spirit when she was doing her drinking. So we were brought up around drink and alcohol, and but you can look at it from a family lineage point of view. Even down my mother's side of the family, the Irish side, which the name was Mahon or Mahon, they drank so much that hotels and all sorts of big landowners went from owning all sorts to owning nothing, because they apparently just drank it all.
But yet, being a devout Christian Catholic, and yet drinking all the time as well, because they don't really go hand in hand, do they? Well, I say they don't, they actually did. They shouldn't go hand in hand. You wouldn't imagine them to, but I know from a Catholic background that people drink heavily, Yeah,
I think they're more closely related than we might think, in as much as, through the conflicts that we have, we begin to shape who we are. And, knowing who we're not leads us to who we are. So, my mum's journey deeper into her faith was very much supported by the long periods during which she drank.
Right.
Which again, we look at triggers. It was triggered by the loss of her father, who she was very, very close to, who was a Labour MP, so she was part of a big political dynasty, as they go in the UK. And then all of a sudden, a whole generation, a whole chapter's disappearing. So she disappeared into the bottle.
Yeah.
But then that journey into the abyss led to her really big awakening into Catholicism, the whole Marian movement, the devotion to Our Lady, and so there was many great aspects and things to learn, and the way contrast shows up in the world. We learn as human beings, we learn through contrast.
Yeah, dichotomies, dark, light, black, white. Yeah, and you say your father was an engineer.
Yeah.
But then you also mentioned beatings again. Now, is that coming from your family rather than obviously the brothers?
Yeah. So my, I don't know whether it was just accepted as a norm in society at the time. It was, and my dad would be away at sea. He was a chief engineer, and then he'd come back, and then, my mum would encourage him. Those boys need to learn a lesson, Jared, would be the words. And I remember he'd come home.
Run.
Yeah, run. We would run. And,
Yeah.
and if you can imagine your father coming home, though, and you're so, this is built up now for, weeks or months, you're petrified.
It's this anticipation of knowing what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely petrified. And then, the majority of the time, we'd get a really good hiding. But, if you're not seeing your dad for 6 to 12 months, and then your next interaction with him is an absolute hiding, it's a bit like,
It's not really a relationship, is it?
Well, it's like, this is totally, you look back on it and think, oh my God, how messed up was this? But my mother, she'd encouraged the Christian brothers, like they were all complicit. She'd encouraged the Christian brothers to beat us as well. These boys need to learn a good lesson. They've got no father at home. And it'd be like, don't worry, Mrs. Garrett, we'll take care of it. And
it's crazy, isn't it? But we look at it now and it seems bizarre. But you go back 30, 40 years ago, it was normal. That was how a lot of things went then, Society's changed,
Yeah, I think it allows us, though, Pat, if we're realistic and honest, to go, all right, so we were in that soup, that consciousness. Beatings were being handed out. And so we then have to take responsibility for that. And I look at it and go, okay, so if I do take responsibility, and what can I learn from it? How can I grow from it? How can I choose to be different?
Yeah.
What was it that was preventing me from being the magnificent human being that I really am? And then really, we start to move towards the idea of the quantum questions by being introspective, going deep into the self and beginning to understand, who am I really at my core, at my essence.
Yeah, and that can be a lifelong journey trying to figure that out, can't it?
It can be many lifetimes.
Well, oh yes. This part of your notes, Greg, really relate to 90% of this. A lot of it I can relate to. In the book, I write about the fact that I believe as children, we're still connected to what I call the spirit realm. You've still got your big toe permanently dipped in. And we have gifts that we lose as we get older. We become more corrupted by society, and we become more material, and we become stressed, and we lose this connection. And I believe children can still see and hear things that we can't, possibly, spirits, other realms, things like this. And I write about it in the book and even give examples of it, the things I've experienced. You say that up until the age of 6, you're awake. And I completely get that. And then certain things happen in your life, and then they sort of reel you in, and then before you know it, you're consumed, and all your energy and your attention focused into this realm, and you lose that connection.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for the listeners, if you can imagine a child having arrived with basically the hard drives completely blank, and then they're having this interface with their primary carer, which is the first being that they're interfacing with in a loving way, which is the mother character. And then you look into mum, and your arms are open wide, and your eyes are open wide, and your heart's open wide, and because that's the way the software is set up. It doesn't know any different. It's looking for love, but then the response that is given is something other than love, be it in the form of a crossword, a pointed finger, or some form of, unnecessary connection. And then this spirit begins to, as opposed to it being expansive and outward, it begins to contract.
Yeah.
And then those contractions lead to the guardedness and the armor. And for the first 6 years, I now know that I was so awake and alive and open that I persevered with this. So it'd be like, take a blow, but you'd be like, no, but this is the being that is my primary love coordinate. And until I got to one hit, one smack, one beating too many, where I actually, at the age of 6, remember, I could take you to the spot now, a road called Bath Street in Waterloo, and sat on a piece of rock still there today. It's a very peculiar out jut. And I'm sat on it, and I just begin to weep, and I've got my head in my hands, and I make a decision. And the decision that I make is I either die, which because I thought death was imminent in terms of the way I was being treated, or I choose to armor up, guard up, and learn how to live in this world, which is, I know it was an absolute turning point for me, where I went from spirit into the material world at that young age of 6.
Again, I do hope you read my book, Greg, because there's everything we're talking about here and everything we're going to talk about is covered in at some level in the book. I think that I was awake, very much so, and even awake till later years to a certain degree, up until about 18 or 19. And then it all went dark, and I didn't wake up again until I was in my 40s. And that section of my life, that period of life, I was totally consumed by the realm of the 5 senses, this world, and I'd lost my connection with spirit, and I had to find it again, and it changed everything. I reverted back to that wonder, that state, and seeing the beauty in everything, and life became a wonderful experience again. So your mum wanted you to be a priest.
This is true, yeah.
Yes, at Up Holland College. Is that right?
Yeah, so she sent me as a junior seminarian at the age of 11.
Were you an altar boy as well?
I did the full altar boy thing.
Yeah. It's one of them things when you're a kid, you think, no, everyone's going to laugh at me. I'm wearing a dress. I don't want to do this. But a lot of kids have to do it. I don't know any that do it. Very few that do it through choice. It's usually forced upon them.
Yeah, I did it all. I mean, altar boy, and then read at church for many, many years, so was always there in service. But yeah, I went to the boarding school, which is quite close to here, or Holland, near Wigan, from the age of 11 to 14.
Boarding school, for me, the two people that love you most in this world, in theory, are your mother and father. They're supposed to emit pure love, and then when they send you away as a child, the child thinks, well, what have I done wrong? And why don't they want me with them? And they appear as if they're highly inconvenient. And it's very hard for a lot of children to get their head around that, and then you don't have that zone of influence, that bubble where your family are there and your best mates and the people you knock around with are the people that influence you the most. And it's a very different life than living at home.
Very, very different. And, I could take this in a number of ways. The biggest lesson, though, I like to look at things now optimistically and look at the positives.
Look at the positives.
Yeah, the biggest lesson for me is detachment.
Yeah.
So, and if you think about being sent away from home, you're getting this huge opportunity to learn how to detach. Now, at 11 to 14, I didn't understand or get that. But later on in life, I realize, further on the path, if you can't detach, you are stuck.
Yeah.
And that's whether you're stuck to a bottle, to a pill, to a relationship. So you have to, at some point or other, learn to be very, very able. Now, and when I talk about detachment, I'm not talking about ambivalence.
No, just independence, isn't it?
It's independence in a heartfelt, centered way. Being able to allow what is taking place to take place, and to be able to bear witness to it, to be able to observe it.
See, in a different way, but again, I can completely associate with that. When I was a child, I lived in Africa, and we used to move around a lot. And by the age of 15, I'd lived in 20 houses. I'd been to 7 schools. We moved around all the time. So as we moved around, and I didn't get a lot of warning when we moved, I had to learn how to have friends, and then they weren't there anymore. And then I'd make new friends. And so I didn't really have any long-term friends. And I learned how to sort of cope with that. And it taught me how to not become too attached. When I was a child, I had to learn to wrap it up and move on. And if I let it suck me in and pull me under, I become really upset, And so I learned those skills at an early age, yeah.
Yeah, and it's vital, as I say, on the path. Because then later on, you begin to recognize, actually, I was learning this lesson as early as, as early as 6, but then again at 11, and constantly being asked to let go of certain things, but being able to then understand the connection to myself could be so much greater as a consequence of not clinging to things in the material world.
It's almost like the universe was training you for your current profession and what you're doing at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wayne Dyer always said he was in a lot of children's homes, but it made him very independent and able to stand on his own 2 feet. And he looks back and he can see all the positives from that, So, yeah, I think everything that happens in your life leads you to this moment right now, being sat with me having this conversation, and they prepared you for it, and it's made you the person who you are. And if you can see life like that, it's all good.
Yeah, and I'd encourage all of the listeners, to take a minute at some point today and to go and look in a mirror and, ask themselves about the timeless part of them. Because normally when they look in the mirror, they're looking at a new wrinkle or a line. It's backed up by some concern or worry or fear. But actually, the timeless part of you is the part behind that. The part of you that when you were born was present, when you were 3 was present, when you were 5, 7, 9, 11, 18, 20, whatever age you are now, 40, 50 years of age, the timeless part of you has always been present, and it always will be.
I call that your soul, your true self, your true essence. And I always say that when you close your eyes, all of this, this spacesuit we're in for a brief moment in this human experience, but when you close your eyes, that never dies. That's your true self.
That's right.
Now, not affected by, but what you'd mentioned and we discussed in the show notes is that while you were at that school, if there was a paedophile ring, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. This, reflects on the church as a whole. It was going on worldwide.
Yeah.
It really has been a catastrophic. I mean, there's no other organization in the world, I don't believe, that would still be standing today.
No.
It'd have been shut down. It'd have been finished. It's corruption at the highest level to the core. But for me now, it's looking at the energetic reasoning, because even though they were promoting this thing called Catholicism, they didn't understand the deeper teachings.
I couldn't agree more. And I'll try not to keep saying this, but it's in the book. I write about that as well. In the first chapter, it's all about things that have happened that we sort of overlook, and maybe looking at the world, getting perspective and seeing things how they really are is important. And to do that, quite often you have to step back and become peaceful. And then you have contrast, perspective, and you can see things as they really are.
Yeah, when I discovered it, Pat, I was really angry about it, in the sense of, could I have done more? should I have been more observant as a younger boy? It's really quite interesting.
You were a child at the time, though.
Yeah, although I look at it, I was the same height, believe it or not. I'm 5'11". I look back, and there's certainly elements, if I look at the priests that were involved in the atrocities, there's certainly energies around them that you can now look back and see. And I was a hindrance to them, because I was this huge lad who was from Liverpool, who was streetwise, and it didn't fit in with the narrative that they needed. So, whatever help I was able to give, I was still saddened by the depravity and the lack of consciousness, and the sadness that, certainly affected some boys' lives,
So then you went back to St Mary's College.
I did.
How does that work? How did you go there and then go back?
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier about the unwantedness.
Yeah.
So I was. Remember there was this situation of what I call injustice, where there's been someone stealing in the school, in the boarding school. Now, what I wasn't aware of is one of the reasons my mother had also sent me to boarding school was because I, in some of my early years, would steal from her. Huh? So when she takes me to the school at the age of 11, she does the really helpful thing of sitting down with the headmaster and some of the priests and saying, something else you need to know about Gregory is that he steals from me. So here I am now, 3 years later, having really settled into this boarding school experience. Yeah. And then this thieving begins. And,
finger points at you.
Yeah, I find it quite hilarious, because I'm like, wow, this person must be such a bad thief. Like, I'm observing the way they're doing things and going about it, and it just seems like hilarious to me.
Did you know who was doing it?
I didn't. No. But then I get dragged in for it, and I'm blamed. And I'm like, now I'm completely like, I'm now the unwanted. If you think about this constant running third child, unwanted, sent to boarding school, unwanted. Now I'm in this school environment and I'm unwanted again. So this resonant, unwanted energy had stayed with me as part of my storyline. So to the point where I just basically say, right, enough's enough, I'm leaving. And I was so popular in the school with the lads and also parents. Apparently, when parents were told, they wept at the fact from my year, we're a very small year group, it was only 14 of us, at the fact that I was leaving. But I was indignant. There was no way I was staying in this school, in this environment.
And because you're a big lad, you were a rugby player.
I played.
Avid.
Yeah. Played a lot.
And you still kept this up for years. Is that right?
Yeah, I played from the age of 6 in the minis down at Waterloo in Liverpool, which was a big club at the time, and then I played all the way through to age 35. And I really did. I enjoyed the community, the camaraderie, the teamwork. I really loved it as a sport. I find now, looking back at it, I'm amazed that I did enjoy it so much, because actually the physical abuse that you put your body through is something that I would no longer choose to do or choose to encourage.
I played rugby for a while, and I just don't think my body could handle it anymore, and I'd be too worried about getting injured, because then I couldn't run, and if I can't run's a big part of keeping my mind in one piece, and staying peaceful. But yeah, I enjoyed rugby. I really did, especially when you're younger, because you got all this and you want to get it out, and it's a good way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, just a funny story, when I was 11 at the boarding school, between 11 and 14, other schools would say, look, we'll play rugby against you, but you can't bring the big lad.
I wonder if we played against you, because I remember playing against Manchester Gamma, and there was, I think it was 15 at the time, and there was one lad, and he was enormous, and we'd all go, and we were all terrified of this one lad. There was this big guy. So yeah,
I know the feeling. Yeah.
So then, Greg, we talk about you were celibate for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that was a choice. Then you decided that I just need some time alone, maybe, to figure things out?
Well, actually, it was more curious than that, because I was actually with my girlfriend who was to become my wife, Rachel, and I've got all this. I'm so conflicted, because it's like, people around me are beginning to get married, and
Yeah.
I've been to a priest training school. My mum always wanted a priest, so now I understand. I've got these conflicted energies colliding. Should I be following a path into the church, or should I be following the path as a married man?
How did you feel about that? Because this path towards it, were you being pushed into it, or was it something you wanted?
Yeah, so I felt as if I was being pushed early on.
Yeah.
Certainly when I originally went to the boarding school, and then later on, though, once I think you've bathed in those thoughts and ideas for long enough,
Yeah.
you've been to enough shrines, you've said enough rosaries.
They become yours without you knowing.
Yeah. So it's just a form of indoctrination in a way.
Yeah.
So therefore, whose life are you living out? Are you living out the wishes of your mother and father, or are you living your own path, your own purpose? And so I was trying to wrestle with this conflict, and at the time, I just said to my partner Rachel, I said, "Look, I'm declaring myself celibate, and I need to remain celibate whilst I work on trying to understand this decision."
So then you get married, and
Yeah,
you were married initially for 20 or 25 years?
20 years.
20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
You're 25 at this point? Is that right?
Ish, yeah.
And you've got, or have 3 children.
Yeah, 3 magnificent children.
And I'm assuming one of those children is the live studio audience today.
Yeah, so Els
Els
is 18. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's with us.
So then your career path.
Yeah.
This is where there's a couple of points in this show where this will go in a certain direction that you won't foresee. Oh, I wouldn't foresee. Sorry, the audience wouldn't foresee. So you go into financial services.
Yeah.
Of course, that's what you do when you've been training as a priest.
Yeah.
But so how did that come about?
Yeah, so if you think about it, so you go to a school like St. Mary's College, Crosby, it's all about, academia and sport and performance. And I, because of the way I was beaten as a young child, I just wasn't a good learner at that point. I'd had all sorts of interruptions in what I would call my ability to learn.
Yeah.
In a way, my abilities to learn had been beaten from me. Now, again, I take responsibility. I accept that as part of my path. And at the same time, it meant, well, there I was later on. I managed to get 5 O levels. And then, I got an A in religion.
Yeah.
So this keeps popping up, this idea of if the universe was showing me something, it's saying, look, you need to pay attention to this. This is what you need to be working on.
Yeah.
So then I get to the end of school, and it's like, oh, well, what am I going to do? And my uncle is involved in money and finance, and he says to me, why don't you come and work for me for a period? And I started to work for him. And basically over my first 3 years of working for him, I managed to build up around £10,000 of debt, which meant that I was in this self-employed environment working with him, but I wasn't able to generate really any income myself. I mean, I had no credibility. No one who was of any means was able to really know, like, and trust me and deal with me as a businessman. So I got a really hard lesson and baptism in, so how does this material world work? But that was really my journey into financial services.
Yeah. And property and stockbroking as well, is that right?
Yeah, so a story then, so with my uncle, so he wasn't great with money, and one of the things that he did was he bought 2 properties supposedly in Fallowfield, in Manchester, and this is many years ago. And then he didn't have the money to complete the renovation and the reconstruction of them. So he went to his mother, who was my grandmother, who lived at home with me, borrowed the money off her, and then was never to repay it. So my life became hell and unbearable because I'm living in this environment.
Yeah.
If you imagine in a family where £30,000, which was a lot of money, was owed, it became so unbearable that he said to me, well, there's one way out of this. If you remortgage these properties and put them in your own name. And I was like, well, what does that mean? What do I have to do? And sure enough, the forms appeared, I signed them, and next thing I know, I own these properties. But does he repay my grandmother?
Yeah.
No, he just takes the money. So I managed to get the houses finished, but then it turns out they're not in Fallowfield. They're on the wrong side of the bus shelter. They're in Moss Side.
Yeah.
And now I own these two properties in Moss Side. The following year, I have to rent them out. I get called out. The carpets have been cut out. The boilers get cut out. I then get called to a shooting. And at that point, I decide, oh my God, I have to let go of these properties. So that was my baptism of fire into property. I have to sell them at a huge loss. I think at the time, again, it was about 13 or 16,000, can't quite remember. So really a baptism of fire into money, finance and property.
I worked in Devon for a while, going back about 15, maybe 20 years ago. And I rented my place out up here. I had an apartment here at Royal Court Drive, which was actually just near where the old infirmary was. And I came back. I couldn't get hold of the guy that was renting it from me. I came back and he'd pulled out all the white goods. The windows had been put through. The doors had been put through. And it was, thousands of pounds worth of damage. Yeah. And I didn't get paid the rent either. So sometimes it can go sideways. It can go really badly. I know a lot of people make money from, being a landlord and renting property out, but my experience of it was terrible.
Yeah, and again, my experience was terrible. But there's always, there's ironies in stories. And actually, if I'd have followed the formula and kept doing pretty similar but a little bit different, finding the right locations, we'd have had a very different financial story. I wasn't meant to have that story.
Yeah.
So I'm not here sat with that.
Yeah.
But I realised how close and yet how far I was from different paths.
There's certain phrases people say and they stick with me and I like them. And I like that one. It's, I wasn't meant to have this story. I'm going to use that. Another lady I know who came on, did a radio show with me called Diane G says, I said, so what exactly has happened? She says, I'm in a process of change. I like that one too.
Yeah.
So what's quite interesting, you've gone down this route. It's not going well at the minute, working in financial services, property, and eventually stockbroking. But at this point, at this early stage, you were looking at self-development and incomes NLP. Mm-hmm. Now, I've had a guy on this show called Darren Siegenberg, and he's a practitioner of NLP. And I know loads of people that are practitioners, but you teach it, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And they all, by the way, say it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe tell us a little bit about what it is and maybe what made you do it at that time, because it's way before some of the other transitions in your life, isn't it?
Yeah, so at the time, I was really perplexed by what makes people tick, and in fact, what makes me tick. And right in Tony Robbins' early days, I was introduced to Robbins, went to UPW, which, people now, so many people in the world have done. But I was more taken with, who taught him? And I found out that even though Tony was telling people it was called neuroassociative conditioning, he'd actually learned from Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who were the originators of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP.
Yeah.
But then there's a real misunderstanding with NLP, because the true essence of NLP is what's known as modeling excellence. So, it could be I come into a studio like yours today, and this is an excellent setup. So I want to model what it is that you do as someone who's excellent in putting together and preparing podcasts. Where people get lost is because the first ever model that was done was a therapeutic model. They think that NLP is all about therapy. It's not. It's about modeling. So you could model in dentistry, in engineering, in medicine. You could model in any area. And the idea of modeling is to work out the difference that makes the difference, which is the unconscious 20% of actions or processes that are going on in the environment that are so unconscious that most people aren't paying attention to them, but they're actually the difference that makes the difference in the performance.
Yeah.
So when Grinder and Bandler did the original modeling inside of therapy, they came up with this 20% that they realized, well, students who were studying psychology for 5 years or more couldn't get as good a set of results as they could get by working with just this narrow range that they'd been able to elicit.
Which could be applied to anything.
Yeah.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But most people, even people who study NLP, don't know that.
Yeah.
That Grinder and Bandler didn't set out to become known and world famous for therapeutic models.
Yeah.
That was just a byproduct of the process called modeling.
See, it makes more sense now. So it didn't apply, it wasn't therapeutic. The NLP could be applied to business or applied to lots of other things.
Which is what I went on to do.
Get it. Yeah. At this point then, in your notes when we discussed it, you've got these huge overheads.
Yeah.
Yeah, 15 grand a month,
in
fact. Tell us a bit about this, because you're spending money. You're part of this material machine then, holidays, cars, houses, all of this.
Yeah, and really managed to get myself caught up in, quicker, bigger, faster, and therefore this, materialistic hamster wheel.
Yeah. Which
just runs in perpetuity. And, often people just don't realize that I've become able to observe and understand finance and money now in a way that I think the creator just uses it artfully and I'm sure has a laugh from time to time. Yeah. Greg wants to earn a lot of money. Oh, okay, let's give Greg a lot of money. But meanwhile, Greg's going to burn as much as he's earning because Greg needs to learn the lesson that it's not about a materialistic world. It's not about consumption, but Greg wants to keep running harder and faster. And so, I'm continued to allow to be working harder and harder, but I'm going nowhere. I'm just driving myself into the ground. I'm burying myself. I'm burning out. Yeah. Which I do on a few occasions, and I'm losing my health. I know it's getting worse. I'm deteriorating on all fronts. Yeah. But now I've got to keep up with the Joneses, and I've got to keep with the fabulous holidays and pay the school fees and all the mobile phones and everything.
I write about this in the book. When you become trapped, you basically quite often when you pursue money, our compass in life should be. We should use, does this make me feel good and is it helping others? That's the compass, how to navigate, rather than how much money is this going to make me? This is what we're taught at school, by the way, how much money we're going to make, what status it give me, what power, etc. And so we're navigating and we're pursuing material wealth. And I say all careers advisors need careers advice because they tell you, they point you in the direction of what's going to earn the most money. And that's not the recipe for happiness. So you should be using this other compass. And we get to a certain point, and because you might be earning lots of money, but because what you're doing doesn't make you happy, you're miserable. And then some people start sniffing cocaine, other people get in debt and just keep buying bigger and better cars or a bigger house. And you end up in debt. And once you're in debt, you can't then stop having this amount of money coming in suddenly, and you start to feel trapped. And that's usually when alcohol and drugs and other things get involved. And quite often you just end up miserable and then you end up becoming ill, and that is the road for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, the pursuit of I'll be happy if and then, if I earn £1 million, or I'll be happy when.
And you never arrive. The goalposts
You never
always
arrive,
move.
no,
Yeah.
because actually, sums of money, and I've worked in the millions, sums of money, actually, the ego grows, the deal size grows, and therefore you need to feed something much bigger. And so when you feed in at a bigger and bigger level, you're just dropping deeper and deeper into the pit, into the mire, or running harder and faster on the hamster wheel.
Yeah. I know about becoming ill. I'm trying to do too much, become obsessed with things, but trying to do that whilst maybe working in construction, whilst getting up at 2 a.m, writing my book, going to work, coming back at 6 p.m, teaching meditation, doing it. And, lucky if I get 2 or 3 hours sleep. I've done that for long periods. And you crash. You end up, I've had a nervous breakdown, and I've been very ill. So I learned the hard way. I'm hopefully getting a bit better at it now, but it takes practice for me anyway. So then we'll talk about where you go from here, and this is where you decide that you're, rather than being at this level and being part of these schemes and things that are happening, you're going to create the schemes. You're going to take a step up. You're going to be a creator yourself.
Yeah, so myself and my brother-in-law, who's an incredibly bright human being, we decide that we're going to design our own schemes, as opposed to being these minions who are sent out to flog and peddle these schemes.
Yeah.
Why don't we go to where the real money's at and become the creators of these schemes? And so we do, we create. And so there are we, these lads in Liverpool who really, living out the what we were taught as kids, bigger, faster, better. Who is it you're going to be in life? What stamp are you going to put on the world? So, we set about, therefore, creating products.
Are these financial products?
Yeah. So financial products. So we designed
like mortgage insurance, things like this.
A little bit more involved. There's a saying which I look back on, and it's really quite horrible. Which the world actually runs by at the moment is, people are more interested in whether it's legal or not than whether it's good for them or good for anyone or not.
Yeah.
So everyone's really pushing on the legality. So we were in the areas of tax, money and finance, and we were looking at legal ways of being able to extract large amounts of money from the system.
Yeah.
And in effect, we came up with a legal way of printing money, which then led to a 7-year journey with the Inland Revenue.
Yeah. So they came, you got arrested.
Dragged from our beds. Yeah. There were 13 arrests on the day. And I was taken from my bed in Windermere.
So you're actually in Windermere at this point? Not Liverpool then?
No, I'm in Windermere now. Yeah, these things also happen in Windermere. So, taken from my bed, and, with officers leaning over my bed, having stormed the house in the early hours of the morning and stripped the house bare, searched the kids' bags on the way to school. Yeah. First question they asked, where's the drugs, money and guns? And I said, sorry, don't want to disappoint you fellas, but I don't do drugs. Yeah. There's no money on the premises and I don't have any guns. So that was sort of, but I just remember that line distinctly, thinking, I can't help you with any of them. And then I was taken to Kendal Police Station and I was interviewed by the Revenue, who really were thick, and that's not just me sat here. They didn't understand one end of pensions from the other, but they thought they were onto something. And actually, it's the way people at higher levels with power act, they'd managed to get a judge to sign off the arrests, but they were kicking our doors in because we'd done something that was legal, which they didn't like, and they then wanted to throw the book at us. And when you're a minion in a big pond, then, you know, Big Brother can stick its boot on your throat and try to choke you to death.
Yeah.
And that's the process that I was then due to go through.
I can relate to many aspects of what you're saying in many different ways, none of which I can talk about. But I've experienced a lot of things you're talking about and seen a lot of things you're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
And something else, people think that the system, you know, our system is corrupt as well, you know.
Yeah, it's shot. It's really shot. Yeah. So eventually it arrives to Crown Court in Birmingham. Yeah. And, you know, we're talking, I'm a bit vague with, I think it was 23 million was the number.
Yeah.
So they've had 7 years to put their case together. And we arrive in court and we've told them over and over, look, you just don't understand what we've done. And it's always sure. But even down to the point that our barristers and legal teams would say, look, guys, you do realise you're going to lose this. And we're like, but why? We've done nothing wrong. No, you're going to lose it because the revenue do not take someone this far and pay this much money not to win.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, surely it doesn't work like that. So there was a weird naivety.
There's funny handshakes go on and all of that business too, you know.
Yeah, possibly. Although, you know, maybe I'm the ray of light. I always felt there was something deeper. There was a deeper spiritual meaning at play. But I'm sat in, so I'll just tell for the audience sake.
Yes.
So every day we would have to re-educate the solicitors and the barristers because it was complicated and they didn't understand it. And I remember they'd sit in the room and they'd go, oh, get it now. Oh, see how you do it. Oh, it's so good. Oh, wow. Why is everyone not doing this? And it was like they'd have these light bulb penny drop moments. But then the following day, we'd have to be back in explaining to them again the way it worked. And so the way a criminal trial works is that the defense go first and they have to prove their case. Well, every day we absolutely annihilated them. Every witness they brought in. But what's also interesting is all of our accountants and solicitors all sided with the revenue. The minute the revenue knock, oh, must be something wrong. These guys are bad. Yeah. Everybody dropped us.
Yeah.
In it.
Well, the revenue very, very rarely lose a case when they've gone to this this amount of trouble.
Yeah. And we became quite famous afterwards in a small circle. Oh, you're the guys who beat the revenue. And we were a bit like, well, we didn't quite see it that way, you know, and I had a very different view to other members of people. You know, I was fortunate because I had my meditation and other practices.
So were you still meditating back then?
Had to, had to.
Pull that face again.
Had to. Yeah. It's like, I mean, talk about dark nights of the soul. You know, I understand now this was a spirit. This was one of the deepest, most profound spiritual chapters in my life because it snapped me out of a lot of the unconsciousness. It was as though someone over me was watching, right, he's just not getting the lesson. Yeah. We're going to have to send in some big guns here. He needs really shaking up. And I was shaken to my foundations, you know.
Yeah. Because I suppose on the flip side of this, if it didn't go well, you're going to jail, aren't you, you know, so...
Oh, yeah, minimum 10 years we're looking at. Yeah.
So somebody had your back. Yeah.
Well, minimum 10 years and we're being told we're going to lose.
Yeah.
And I remember, so the point for me is I'm sat in the courtroom and I'm sat and I'm having this thought of actually I'd rather go to jail than go home.
Yeah.
And the reason I'd rather go to jail than go home is because I cannot continue on this hamster wheel.
Yeah.
I cannot continue to pay these overheads and live this bullshit so-called life. I have run so hard, so fast for so long. I am exhausted. I am beat. And in that moment, I'm like, right, this is the lowest, saddest thought I could possibly be having. I need to change something here. I need to change this.
In the book again, I write about something very similar to this, and I say that we're all on a treadmill going at 100 miles an hour, and I got thrown off it, had a nervous breakdown, just come flying off it. And then I could look back see what had been going on. I thought, how have I been doing this for so long? But the clever thing is, you don't know you're on it until you get off it. It's only when you're off it and you have perspective and clarity and focus and you stand still can you see what you've been doing all your life. And I realised that there was no going back. Once you're off it, you do not want to get back on.
It's quite funny because even though I obviously won, you know, because I wouldn't be here, but people often say to me, but did you win? And it's like, of course I won because I'm sat here.
Yeah.
So they're even quite drawn and taken into the story in that way, that what happened was we got to half time. The revenue had cheated, lied. If you saw some of the ways they approached it, it was horrendous. To the point
because they were desperate, because they were going to lose.
Oh, they were desperate.
They knew they were going to lose, but they didn't want you to know you were going to lose until they'd try anything.
Yeah, and just one small thing that they tried, because I think it's something that's good for the listeners to understand, that their expert, who was an internal person in the revenue, was clearly press ganged by some of the officers that had undertaken the arrests, to the extent that when they arrive at the trial, they ask to substitute their expert. And we're like, well, hang on a minute. They've relied on this guy for the last 7 years. Why do they want to substitute? Yeah. So they put it forward to the judge to say, can we substitute this guy out and put this other guy in? And the judge then takes a couple of days to hear all the arguments as to why it should or shouldn't be allowed. Anyway, the judge finds in our favour and says, no, the expert needs to stand. Only at that point, they then tell us the guy left the revenue on the grounds of ill health a year or so earlier. So they kept that quiet from the system. And the reason he left is because he knew he couldn't go and lie under oath at our trial, even though he'd lied in earlier documentation, because they'd put him under pressure.
I know of a comparable case to this one where people just started going missing left, right and centre. You know, I don't mean getting bumped off, but I mean people that were involved in a case then disappeared abroad or just they vanished, you know. Yeah. And this happens.
So just to round the story for you, Pat, then we get, so the judge at half time says, I can't listen to this nonsense any longer, to the revenue. He says, I don't even know what your case is anymore. So the revenue have the right of appeal. They immediately appeal. We're sent then down to London to the Lord Chief Justice himself, to the High Court, where immediately, and it's done under a cloud of secrecy because no one's allowed to know that this is happening. Yeah. And everyone's still, the barristers and the lawyers, saying, look, he'll just send it straight back. He'll find some way of kicking it back into the system. You've got no chance. Strange as it happens, we were being looked over. Yeah. Lord Chief Justice reads through it and then just says, waste of taxpayers' money, could have built 3 schools. You know, the amount of money they threw at trying to put us away.
This is a really interesting question. So you're found innocent, the case gets thrown out, but you get being banned from a director for 13 years. How can they do that?
Okay, so well, the first thing is then you say, well, surely we've got a huge claim now. But
banned from a director can't make a claim.
No. It's actually, it's funnier than that. Anyone who goes to court where you've been charged by a government body, it's frowned upon. No matter how much of your life has been expunged, it's frowned upon for you to go and make a claim against the public purse. Yeah, because the public purse has already lost an incredible amount of money.
Which has nothing to do with you, by the way. But yeah,
we were told. I went to 3 different law firms, and they all said the same: you will not get a penny. They do not look favourably on it. The system doesn't look favourably on it, no matter how much of your life has been absorbed by this.
I know a case where they did take them to court, and they applied for compensation. I think it took 11 years, and they got it.
Okay.
So it does happen, but it's very rare.
Yeah.
Most people are dead and gone by the time you try and get any money out of them.
Yeah, and I suppose for us, you know, we're creative individuals, and it was more about, if you think about it, oh my God, we just got our lives back.
Yeah.
But the final twist from the revenue's point of view, so Lord Chief Justice, you've got to go back to Birmingham then to be, I think the work terms arraigned, which means they're letting you go. And so we get sent back, and the judge in his summing up says, which he's clearly been asked to say this, I just need to tell you that this wouldn't have been possible had the measures that are now in place have been in place. And I remember my brother-in-law sat next to me writing out 11 other ways that we could have done what we did. So just in the spirit of, but they also said that in us finding you not guilty, we're not saying that this is legal. Because and he said, I can't tell you that it's legal because I'm not a tax judge specifically. But what they're petrified of is that what we'd uncovered could have taken the whole system down financially.
Well, this is a question I was going to pose to you. So you didn't break any laws. What you did wasn't illegal. And since this case has happened and everything's moved on, has anybody else taken it up?
Yeah, so ironically, there were other people who tried to mirror what we did, but most of them ended up on trial and getting sent to prison.
Wow.
Yeah, because they didn't understand the technicalities.
Right.
So it's like the devil copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the devil's in the detail. And actually, if these other people hadn't have done what they'd done, what happened to us probably never would have come to pass in the way that it did. But that's the path.
Yeah.
So if anyone can be bothered reading the case notes, then they'll get to the revenue's final response to say, yes, these men got off. But the reason that they got off in basic summary was because we didn't have enough time to prepare our case and try them properly. 7 years,
yeah.
Yeah.